Yeah, hey Sky. I thought this would be easier than trying to type it all in because it might make a little more sense. Maybe if I'm kind of talking about it, because I believe that there is always more information communicated in conversation than in typing, although it is close. Okay, so that being said, I've got your papyrus logs here. You can see that, give me one second here because I actually closed the archive I pulled them from. But I may have to get them again here if I took them out. It did take them out. All right, so let me go in here and let's take a look at the papyrus log. We're going to take a look at them one at a time. We're going to go from the oldest to the newest. Basically, what the way that I look at these files, the papyrus logs, is the most current file is always 0. So let's say there's no papyrus logs in the directory. It starts out as papyrus log 0. So imagine that you need to have a unique file name, so you add an index number to the file name, such as .1, .2, .3, kind of like the way Windows does when it copies files. The file already exists, it'll copy it again, but it gives it a new name, like 1 within parentheses. So you run the game and it creates the papyrus log 0. Once you exit the game and then you run it again, the game, if I'm not mistaken, should rename papyrus 0 log to papyrus 1 log. And I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, again, I do believe there is a value you can set that defines how many logs you want to keep. So it basically rotates from 0 to 4. So once you run it again, 0 becomes 1, 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3. So I think what it does is it deletes the oldest and then renames everything up and then opens the new file. Okay, so that being said, let's start with the oldest file first. Okay, so whenever the game starts up, of course you have your papyrus settings and all of that. Whenever the game starts up, you almost always have a ton of these. Also, like, I believe this is when you load a game. Even though you've already got the game booted, when you load a new game save, I believe it reinitializes all of this. But don't quote me on it. I could be wrong. I really want to say that things like cannot open store or class only happens. These kind of things right here only happen when the game is first loaded. But what I wanted you to see was this. Property on iType or script, and here it is again, cannot be initialized because the value is of the incorrect type. Now there is a ton of these. If you look, they repeat. iType, incorrect type. This is repeated a lot in the script, and there's different reference numbers here. I didn't really look to see if the reference numbers actually link up. So, like, well, if they're the same. Like, for example, you've got a block of these here. You've got an 18. This is a reference number. So, and this more than likely points to perhaps a plugin or a simple long value that is like a memory location that contains data of some type. So they call it like a reference. A reference is a memory location that points to data. And then you'd have to know what data is in that memory location in order to parse it out, parse it correctly. So there's a lot of these. There's a ton of these. And I haven't really, I'm just looking at this in general. So I see this a lot. We're going to eventually get to the one where it's the most current game, but we're taking a look at this. We have something here that says we have mismatched arguments. So here we got a stack trace, which again I'm not sure. This is an ACP thing, but notice how it's got an injection script. See this? All right, so it's good that King Gath or whichever programmer did this, they named a function they give a function a name that kind of is indicative of what the function does. So let me check something here real quick. All right, we're good. So indicative of what a function does. So like let's say you have a function that adds money to account. Like let's say you want to add money to an account. Instead of calling a function XYZ FUNC, which you're like when you look at that, you're like, what is that supposed to be? And then you have to look it up in the code, and it's really time consuming and it's exhaustive. But if you call your function add money to account, then in your code you can say, oh, I'm adding money to account, and the parameters I'm going to pass is this is my account number and this is the amount. And then your function takes that and does whatever. So here it says there is something wrong with parameter 2. I don't know what, I'm not sure what, I'm not familiar with any of this stuff here, like workshop framework, but I'm looking at where it comes from. Okay, you have a lot of these that pop up. See, there's a ton of these. Cannot access on a non-structure. Now, what from my understanding, what they did is these could be warnings. They could be one of two things. Basically, the papyrus is saying you're trying to call a function on a reference that points to no data. You could call it 0. That's why you see exception violation trying to access location 0. That means that the variable that has a reference which points to a memory location, the value of that is 0. So there is no reference, there is no memory location or reference stored in that variable. Now, Papyrus, from what I understand, the way they wrote it, is it will filter these out. In other words, the programmer has conditionals, like I'll show you. You probably already know this, but like in this example here, I have a conditional. Okay, so in this conditional, what I say is that if the item, and again, you're looking at this stuff here because these are menus. Like this is a menu that pops up, and you notice that it's different from this menu. So basically what I do is say if the item is not a file name. So if the item, in other words, you have a variable and I'm checking that variable to see if one of those bits is set. If it is not, like I have or else, if the item doesn't have a link, so what I did here basically is say I have an item database and I have a web link database. If I look the item up in the web link, which is what you see here, website info, if there is no link in that dictionary, I want to remove that option from the menu. And what that in effect does is everything is nested in this conditional. So if usually ends in end if. That's the end of that block. Now you can have else or else if. You can have other statements which kind of extend the logic of it, but that's basically the beginning and end of the block. Okay, so it's conditional, and if the conditions is true, it will actually execute what is within this block. Even if you're checking for a false value, the condition needs to be true for that to execute. All right, so let's go back to this. All right, so looking at this, like I said, you can have it looks like there's a null reference. So what Papyrus, the people that wrote Papyrus, what they do is they kick out a warning. It can be one of two things. Let's talk about the warning. They kick out a warning that literally says, this, you're asking me to try to reference memory location 0. I'm looking at a variable. That variable has a value in it. That value points to a memory location which contains data. That value is 0. So in effect, it's pointing to memory location 0. That is reserved. That is kind of a Windows reserved space. When I have more time, I'll talk about like the older computer systems back when computers were first being developed. Memory address 0 was like a boot address, because whenever you power everything off, everything goes back to 0. So that's almost like a boot address. but that changed with Windows. All right, but it still might exist to a certain degree, although some processors, the modern processors, if I'm not mistaken, will allow booting from different memory locations. Okay, so anyways, that being said, don't quote me on that, but anyways, that being said, this comes up a lot too. Okay, this is HUD framework, so it's looking for something. I'm not sure what slave quest is, but and of course that's I'm assuming that when it called the function, because here's the function, cannot call function, it referenced the source script. That's what it's doing here. It's looking up the compiled addresses in the source script, or it may have little tokens that points to the instruction line, and that's what you're seeing here. I don't know if that changed, because it literally that I'm not sure. So I'm not sure what slave quest is. I'm not really sure. But anyways, this is coming up a lot. Okay, that's that one. Now, let's grab the next one real quick. Let's just see what's in the next papyrus. So we're going backwards in time. We're going from the oldest to the newest. Okay, this is where you first load up your game, and you have all of this stuff. Should kind of remain the same. But notice I type on script. It is some kind of like miscellaneous object stage item. So again, it says the value is incorrect type. I'm going to explain that here in a second and why that's important. But if you look, most of these are that. Now, I think this can happen, and see, it looks almost like an exact duplicate of the others. You still have the same kind of stuff, same things popping up. All right, in other words, you have the same messages in your papyrus log. It's from a different game session. So we're going to we're getting closest to the most current. Current has a lot more items in it. Again, tons of I type are showing up in this. I mean, it's almost spamming your log. I mean, that constitutes probably 90% of your log. And I'll again take, you can take a look, but it's pretty much the same stuff. Same unable to call, incorrect type. Okay. So let's take a look at the most recent. This is from the last one where you may have encountered your problem. Notice the smaller scroll icon. There's a lot more data here, but notice we're still going through tons of I type. That's the majority of the spam in this log. Unable to bind script. Base types do not match. All right, let's keep, and it looks like this is, I'm not sure what standalone workbench is. I'm not sure where this comes from. Like KG helpers, I'd have to look it up. But that I'm not sure. I don't have any databases right now that would have script functions that makes it easy to locate where it could possibly be. Maybe sometime in the future. That is going to be a tremendous amount of data. But notice the I types. Unable to get type. Objects, let's see. Cannot open store, missing file. Cheat terminal. Okay, so oftentimes when there's a missing file, it happens in one of two ways. Either the scripting is looking, they will have compatibility for a plugin, and the plugin is optional. So if the plugin is there, the script will test for it and then do whatever it's going to do accordingly. Or the plugin, which actually is what references the scripts. The scripts are either loose or they're stored in a BA2 file, usually a main file. Textures usually have textures. But in the main BA2 for the plugin, that was probably removed. That is what I would consider a possibility. Now, that is not necessarily detrimental to the game. It just depends. I mean, it's kind of some things you can remove. For example, you could have a mod that has a texture. It is a loose file. You remove that mod, the texture gets removed. It doesn't change any references. It doesn't change any scripts. Therefore, it should be safe to install and remove. You will just see something visually different in the game, unless there's a problem with the texture, and it should be the same for a mesh. So there are certain there are certain files, there's certain game files that are represented as objects in the game, such as a tree, a gun, things like that, clothing. Uh, there are certain things that are represented as objects that should be absolutely safe to install or uninstall. If your scripts stop and they're no longer running, to me it should be safe to uninstall it. That's what a lot of the uninstallers do. It stops the running scripts, which detaches them from whatever objects they're attached to. But if for some reason some of the scripts get loose from being managed by the plugin or the scripts, the actual scripts itself, then you will have rampant scripts running that are not controlled by something else, and therefore you would not only have a problem with an uncontrolled script, which could cause anything from a crash to just really odd behavior because it's running and nothing is checking on it, or it's not checking itself. All right, so let's, so for example, if you've got like an object in the world and you attach a script to it. So let's say you attach something to it that says when you interact with it. Oftentimes when the object is deleted or marked for deletion, I believe that it will, could be wrong, but it may or may not. I don't know Papyrus that well, and I don't know what the programmers have done, so they may or may not have stopped any scripts attached to it. As a programmer, I would say that is the most logical thing to do, and to report in a Papyrus log that you did forcibly stop a script. You unloaded that script because you're unloading the object. If not, the script will continue to run in Papyrus. It'll have frames that are continuing to run, but now the object it's trying to reference doesn't exist because it's been deleted. That should pop up as warning messages here in the Papyrus. Now, in the second case, if the object is something that is absolutely referenced, so there is no check in Papyrus, there's nothing else that checks for it, and you try to use the script to reference it, you will get a crash. Papyrus, you'll get a game crash because you're trying to reference, and it'll be an exception violation crash. Okay, so there's a couple things like looking at this, and again, you can see it's all the same stuff. Where it says cannot call delete on a none object, and this has got some settlement. So I'm not sure if a script, I don't know if an object is getting, like, for example, when plots get updated, if scripts are being cleaned off of the objects or something, and even, I'm not really sure. I would assume they would, but some scripts are still running. They're still connected to objects that are no longer there. They're deleted. Whether the plugin was removed, the object was marked for deletion, whether in console or in another script. If those conditions aren't accounted for, then you're going to have scripts currently running in Papyrus that have no object. And you would think that it would say, okay, there's no object, I'm going to completely exit out of this script. But if the script is in a loop, like, it will ignore the function call. But if the function call is in a loop, like that while end while. So while means that while whatever the condition following it is true, then that loop is going to continue to execute unless you do an exit while or something like that. You have a jump or a go to out of that, and that would be like similar differences between, let's say, C#, a Visual Basic, things like that. Which is the function you would use to exit the loop. It would be just as easy to say whatever the condition is, set it at the end of the while. So like in a for next, it really depends when the check occurs. So I believe in a while statement, the check occurs at the while statement, whereas in a for next statement, it does that final check. Like if you say for x equals 1 to 2, once you add 1, or if you say let's see, right, for x equals 1 to 2, when it hits next, it checks that condition. So while and like a while loop and a for loop, they do their checks at different positions to determine whether the condition is true, met, so they can exit the loop. A do loop will just keep going unless you have a do while. All right, so anyways, back onto this. So looking at this, it looks like something might have gotten removed. Also, what might cause this, see, take a look at this. Their base types don't match. This is, again, a big block of stuff, and it looks like it says the something, the ME definition, armors. I'm not really sure. So either something got removed, and that is why something got, like a plugin got removed, or maybe an add-on pack got removed. I'm not sure. But like I say, when something like that gets removed, an object gets removed, a plot gets updated, those scripts, any object that has a connected script, that script should exit out before the object is deleted. Or the script should check for a deleted object, and once it's deleted, should never be executed again. It gets more difficult when you have many scripts calling each other and trying to work independent, but yet work cohesively together. Whereas data from one script is required for it was not required, but is used by another script. So you have this cascade effect, and being able to count for all those conditions means you have a very your scripts are going to have a big memory footprint. And I know Xbox and the Sony console, the PlayStation, does not have a big memory footprint or a big hard drive footprint in which to store this data. So speaking, and then I'm going to take off the track here for a second, and speaking from personal experience, when I'm developing code, one of the first things I always do, and this is kind of almost like a mistake, but it depends on the purpose that I'm developing the code. It depends on the reason and the purpose. Okay, and what I'm about ready to explain is, sometimes when a person starts out to develop code, they try to make the code as tight as possible right off the bat. And that's part of the design philosophy. I'm going to try to make sure this takes as least memory as possible. It doesn't have the largest footprint on disk. It's going to have the smallest footprint. It's going to require the smallest hard drive space that it could have. But in doing that, you actually have to cut a lot of corners. So your mind's already thinking cut corners. Now, in the long run, that makes modifying, updating, or upgrading, adding to, maintenance, it makes it more difficult. Because you may, at the time you wrote the code, you may have a complete recollection of what the variables are, but at a later date you do not. Any programmer can read code, and they can say, oh yeah, I know what this is. This is an if-then statement, so I just want to change the if-then statement and add this. But you have, the code is processing data. It's conditionally looking at data, and it's doing things with data. And without understanding what the data is, you're making a blind change. Now that almost always happens later on down the road, after a programmer, and that includes me too. After a programmer writes something, there's no way our brains can remember every single thing we write, but we know how to speak a language. Programming is a language, so we can easily read the language, but it's the data and the context of the data and what the data is used for that we have to figure out, so that the code will do what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to function properly. Okay, so that being said, either something got removed, or I'm not really sure what's going on, or the scripts got updated and the scripts were changed, which may have left orphan scripts. It may have changed the types of the values, like where it says these types don't match. This could be from a previous version that's still running in Papyrus, or it's from the new version where the types don't match. Now here's the problems with type not matching. The way the computer represents data is with bits. It's either on or off, right? And bits are organized into bytes, so they call it a byte. And that's basically 8 bits. A word is 16 bits. And each one of those bits moving from the rightmost position to the left increases by the power of 2 because it is base 2. It's either on or off. So as you go across from power of 0 to power of 1, power of 2, as you keep going across. Now you keep going across those bits, you have like, let's say you have 32 bits or 64. As you go up, each one of those bits represents the power of 2, and it's those combination of bits that gives you a number. The problem with types not matching is that either a value, such as let's say I type here, let's see, unable to bind script. Okay, so this is flags. So either a flag at one point has a variable of 16 bits, and now it's trying to move it to 8 bits. So you're losing the top 8 bits of that value. So any bits that are set higher than 8 bits are going to get lost, and the number will be different, if you can understand what I'm saying. So that is why types are bad. Also, you can have a structure. A structure is an organized group of variables that you can reference as a block. So imagine a variable that is 16 bits. It's a word, so it's 2 bytes. So when you allocate in memory, when the operating system says, how much memory do you need? Well, I'm defining a word. Oh, you need 2 bytes. So I'm going to give you 2 bytes. And I'm going to give you a reference pointer to that. Now, the compiler does that automatically. So you see, that's all happening behind the curtains. Okay, back to structure. So I got sidetracked. So back to structure. So a structure would be like, let's say, SS2 plot, and then you would have X, Y, Z. You have all these variables, name of the structure, author of the structure, or whatever you want. This would all be in a, author of the plot. This would all be in one structure. So when you allocate a structure, the computer says, oh, I need to allocate enough variable. I need enough memory for this variable, oh, I know this is 2 bytes. A name is a, if it's 64-bit computer, 64-bit reference, it points to a memory location that has the string of the name in it. It could be a 0-byte truncated. It could be what they call a W string, where it has this little, or even a B string, where it has the count, a byte count in front of the string itself, so it knows how many it is. But what you have is a contiguous block of something. So it allocates a block of memory, and each little piece of that block represents a variable. That's a structure. So either the scripts are not, they're passing variables, like you have one script that's trying to reference another script's variable, but it's not taking into consideration that it thinks it's a different size. It's trying to move one variable to another, which is a different size. And it knows that if you move a larger variable size into a smaller variable size, you are going to lose data. And that is why it's warning you. So I don't know if it was an update. Like, I don't know if when you start, like when you updated Workshop Framework or some settlements, when you update that, if you started a new game after an update, because usually whenever I was using SS2 and then Workshop Framework, I always just inline updated it with the game I was playing, and then I always started encountering problems. So I'm assuming it has to do something with that. So those are what I think the errors are. So what we have to do is figure out, because a lot of those are I types, is to figure out what that is. Where did that come from, and why is the base types not matching? Is it not matching because you have 2 scripts that thinks it's 2 different types of variables? Like I said, a byte, a word, a long. It thinks it's signed or unsigned, where the leftmost bit will define whether it's negative, whether it's a negative number. So you lose that particular power of 2, so you have to have a smaller number, but you can now represent negative numbers, because without that, and as long as it's not floating or anything like that, then you basically have all positive numbers. So yeah, so that's what I think it is. So I just want to pass this on to you. I know it's long, it's very wordy, but I thought that might help understand some of this, because looking at it from the outside in, I don't know what these scripts do. I'm just reading this contextually as it is and saying, okay, this is to me what it's pointing at. and maybe that'll give you some information to maybe post back, or one of the devs can post back and maybe help you out more. So good luck with it. I hope I didn't put you to sleep, and I hope you have a good evening.